to Fortune Forecasts, and I am your hostess, Daisy Raisler. And if you've been following along, we have been diving through the Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science, written by Thomas Troward, who was an Englishman, and was really one of those individuals who influenced the New Thought movement, and I would easily say one of those founding authors of the law of attraction. So we learned in that first chapter about the spirit as being thought and matter as being form, and activating the law of averages. And as we become more aware of our divinity, in my best explanations, through this increased intelligence, we reduce what they were calling, or what he was calling, the margin of averages, where we get closer and closer to this understanding of this incredible thing that we are. He also added that it is our own individual choice to be in cooperation with this consciousness. And in chapter 3, my favorite part was really breaking it down to that simplicity that God simply is, that using science and math, letting us understand that God is a unit, and it cannot be divided, cannot be conquered, cannot be broken, cannot be multiplied. God is, was, and will be. And so the same thing as the scientific explanation of what God is, this unity, it cannot be divided nor multiplied. It just simply exists. And so where are we going to go now, and where else can this author take us into understanding deeper truths? Because that was one thing that he did mention. He mentioned that there are people, individuals, that are aware of the laws of the universe, and they use it to their advantage every day. And many of us are ignorant of these laws, and then wonder why we're either hitting the mark or missing the mark. Imagine if you had these laws and you could apply them. What a difference your life could be, right? So with that being said, let's jump into chapter 4, Subjective and Objective Mind. Up to this point, it has been necessary to lay the foundations of the science by the statement of highly abstract general principles, which we have reached by purely metaphysical reasoning. We now pass on to the consideration of certain natural laws which have been established by a long series of experiments and observations, the full meaning and importance of which will become clear when we see their application to the general principles which have hitherto occupied our attention. The phenomena of hypnosis are now so fully recognized as established scientific facts that it is quite superfluous to discuss the question of their credibility. 2 great medical schools have been founded upon them, and in some countries they have become the subject of special legislation. The question before us at the present day is not as to the credibility of the facts, but as to the proper inferences to be drawn from them. And a correct apprehension of these inferences is one of the most valuable aids to the mental scientist, for it confirms the conclusions of a purely a priori reasoning by an array of experimental instances, which places the correctness of those conclusions beyond doubt. The great truth which the science of hypnotism has brought to light is the dual nature of the human mind. Much conflict exists between different writers as to whether this duality results from the presence of two actually separate minds in the one man, or in the action of the same mind in the employment of different functions. This is one of those distinctions without a difference which are so prolific a source of hindrance to the opening out of truth. A man must be a single individuality to be a man at all, and so the net result is the same whether we conceive of his varied modes of mental action as proceeding from a set of separate minds, strung, so to speak, on the thread of his one individuality and each adapted to a particular use, or as varied functions of a single mind. In either case, we are dealing with a single individuality, and how we may picture the wheelwork of the mental mechanism is merely a question of what picture will bring the nature of its action home to us most clearly. Therefore, as a matter of convenience, I shall, in these lectures, speak of this dual action as though it proceeded from two minds, and an outer and an inner. And the inner mind we will call the subjective mind, and the outer the objective, by which names the distinction is most frequently indicated in the literature of the subject. A long series of careful experiments by highly trained observers, some of them men of worldwide reputation, has fully established certain remarkable differences between the action of the subjective and that of the objective mind, which may be briefly stated as follows. The subjective mind is only able to reason deductively and not inductively, while the objective mind can do both. Deductive reasoning is the pure syllogism which shows why a third proposition must necessarily result if two others are assumed. But which does not help as to determine whether the two initial statements are true or not. To determine this is the province of inductive reasoning, which draws its conclusion from the observation of a series of facts. The relation of the two modes of reasoning is that, first, by observing a sufficient number of instances, we inductively reach the conclusion that a certain principle is of general application. And then we enter upon the deductive process by assuming the truth of this principle and determining what result must follow in a particular case on the hypothesis of its truth. Thus, deductive reasoning proceeds on the assumption of the correctness of certain hypotheses or suppositions with which it sets out. It is not concerned with the truth or falsity of those suppositions, but only with the question as to what results must necessarily follow, supposing them to be true. Inductive reasoning, on the other hand, is the process by which we compare a number of separate instances with one another until we see the common factor that gives rise to them all. Induction proceeds by the comparison of the facts, and deduction by the application of universal principles. Now, it is the deductive method only which is followed by the subjective mind. Innumerable experiments on persons in the hypnotic state have shown that the subjective mind is utterly incapable of making the selection of comparison which are necessary to the inductive process, but will accept any suggestion, however false, But having once accepted any suggestion, it is strictly logical in deducing the proper conclusions from it, and works out every suggestion to the minutest fraction of the results which flow from it. As a consequence of this, it follows that the subjective mind is entirely under the control of the objective mind. With that utmost fidelity, it reproduces and works out to its final consequences whatever the objective mind impresses upon it. And the facts of hypnotism show that ideas can be impressed on the subjective mind by the objective mind of another, as well as by that of its own individuality. This is a most important point, for it is on this amenability to suggestion by the thought of another that all the phenomena of healing, whether present or absent, of telepathy and the like depend. Under the control of the practiced hypnotist, the very personality of the subject becomes changed for the time being. He believes himself to be whatever the operator tells him he is. He is a swimmer breasting the waves, a bird flying in the air, a soldier in the tumult of battle, an Indian stealthily tracking his victim. In short, for the time being, he identifies himself with any personality that is impressed upon him by the will of the operator, and acts the part with inimitable accuracy. But the experiments of hypnotism go further than this and show the existence in the subjective mind of powers far transcending any exercised by the objective mind through the medium of the physical senses. Powers of thought reading, of thought transference, of clairvoyance, and the like, all of which are frequently manifested when the patient is brought into the higher mesmeric state. And we have thus experimental proof of the existence in ourselves of transcendental faculties, the full development and conscious control of which would place us in a perfectly new sphere of life. But it should be noted that the control must be our own, and not that of any external intelligence, whether in the flesh of it or not, or out of it. But perhaps the most important fact which hypnotic experiments have demonstrated is that the subjective mind is the builder of the body. The subjective entity in the patient is able to diagnose the character of the disease from which he is suffering and to point out suitable remedies, indicating a psychological knowledge exceeding that of the most highly trained physicians, and also a knowledge of the correspondences between diseased conditions of the bodily organs and the material remedies which can afford relief. And from this, it is but a step further to those numerous instances in which it entirely dispenses with the use of material remedies and itself works directly on the organisms, so that complete restoration to health follows as the result of the suggestions of perfect soundness made by the operator to the patient while in the hypnotic state. Now, these are facts fully established by hundreds of experiments conducted by a variety of investigators in different parts of the world, and from them we may draw two inferences of the highest importance. One, that the subjective mind is in itself absolutely impersonal, and the other is that the builder of the body, or in other words, it is the creative power in the individual. That it is impersonal in itself is shown by its readiness to assume any personality by hypnotist chooses to impress upon it. And the unavoidable inference is that its realization of personality proceeds from its association with the particular objective of its own individuality. Whatever personality the objective mind impresses upon it, that personality it assumes and acts up to. And since it is the builder of the body, it will build up a body in correspondence with the personality thus impressed upon it. These two laws of the subjective mind form the foundation of the axiom, they form the foundation of the axiom that our body represents the aggregate of our beliefs. If our fixed belief is that the body is subject to all sorts of influence beyond our control, and that is that, or the other symptom shows that such an uncontrollable influence is at work upon us, then this belief is impressed upon the subjective mind, which, by the law of its nature, accepts it without question and proceeds to fashion bodily conditions in accordance with this belief. Again, if our fixed belief is that certain material remedies are the only means of cure, then we find in this belief the foundation of all medicine. There is nothing unsound in the theory of medicine. It is the strictly logical correspondence with the measure of knowledge which those who rely on it are as yet able to assimilate, and it acts accurately in accordance with their belief that in a large number of cases medicine will do good, but also in many instances it fails. Therefore, for those who have not yet reached a more interior perception of the law of nature, the healing agency of medicine is a most valuable aid to the alleviation of physical maladies. The error to be combated is not the belief that, in its own way, medicine is capable of doing good, but the belief that there is no higher or better way. Then, on the same principle, if we realize that the subjective mind is the builder of the body, and that the body is subject to no influence except those which reach it through the subjective mind, then what we have to do is to impress this upon the subjective mind and habitually think of it as a fountain of perpetual life, which is continually renovating the body by building it in strong and healthy material, in the most complete independence of any influences of any sort, save those of our own desire impressed upon our own subjective mind by our own thought. When once we fully grasp these considerations, we shall see that it is just as easy to externalize healthy conditions of body as the contrary. Practically, the process amounts to a belief in our own power of life. And since this belief, if it be thoroughly domiciled within us, will necessarily produce a correspondingly healthy body, we should spare no pains to convince ourselves that there are sound and reasonable grounds for holding it. To afford a solid basis for this conviction is the purpose of mental science. And this is the end of Chapter 4. So, as we dig a little deeper here and kind of want to share some of my thoughts, I was scribbling while I was reading. So, we see a few things here. I just kind of want to go back to some of the words that were shared from the previous chapters, such as universal laws, correspondences, the law of averages, and now natural laws. So definitely a lot of things for me to ponder after we close out this session today. But let's go back to some of the other things. And one of the things that he mentioned as we were going through this chapter was apprehension. And I was wondering, where is he going to go with this? But I've already read this 3 times, and so I have an idea. So I'll go on a little bit further. So he goes on to say, man is a single individuality. And so he goes on to talk about the brain, the mind, and talks about the subjective mind and the objective mind. He was talking about the subjective mind is the one that makes deductions. It doesn't care that you don't have, let's say, a car, but if you are saying something into your mind that there are some that it was going to be there, it's going to work its way towards that. It doesn't want to look at the facts, while the inductive mind is that objective mind where it's going to say, well, give me a couple things that I can, look at, and I'm going to look at these factors, and then that's how I'm going to get my conclusion. So it would be safe to say, as he mentioned the word universe, as when he was referring to the subjective mind, is that subjective mind that quote-unquote little voice, God's voice in us? And what then was a little bit disturbing was when he said, well, the objective mind controls the subjective mind. So it's like it oversees it. So here you have a subjective mind that apparently sees all the possibilities. It's not worried about A plus B. It just says, okay, let's go to C. And while the objective mind is like, no, we need to make sure that A is there and that B is there, and that's how you're going to get to C. So that's pretty interesting right there. So that's how they moved on then to kind of go to that next area about healing, and how he added in there, the control must be our own and not that of any external intelligence, because he said that the subjective mind is the builder of the body. And so he also added that believing in our own power of life, because it is domiciled within us, like God in you, God in me. And so is our objective mind saying things that's just sabotaging our dreams and the possibilities and the abundance? I don't know how many of you have heard of, there's 2 individuals I'll share with you. One of them is Edgar Cayce, and I'm making a little note here that I will do a program on that. And Edgar Cayce, he was called the sleeping prophet, and literally he would go under like a hypnosis. At first he would have his assistant help him go into that hypnotic state, and then as he kept doing it more and more, he could actually put himself into that state naturally. And then they would just, I guess the people that were there overseeing the process, he had people coming from all over the United States with many different illnesses that doctors could not cure, and he was diagnosing to the detail. So if you get a chance, look a little bit on that so that you'll have a little heads up when I bring the information to the channel. Edgar Cayce. The other one that I'm also going to do a program on is Greg Braden, and he talked about the power of prayer, and he talked about that he went to this monastery, and they were healing this woman that had cancer, and literally he was there watching, and they were chanting and just putting the prayer was the healing, and it was in their words, and it was in their belief, and they were doing the laying of hands, and the lady got cured. But definitely I'll share that with you. So, but I'm not going to go that far. I'm going to share with you something that happened to me personally. So this probably is a little bit over 30 years ago. I would one day, I was going to a police funeral, and I had to wear my formal uniform, and so I realized I couldn't put my tie on. And then I realized I had like this golf ball. I have a picture of it still somewhere on my remember when they used to take pictures and put them in albums? Yeah, okay, that was me. But anyway, so I had this golf ball. So I didn't button my button, but I was able to kind of bring my tie up to cover the fact that I didn't button my butt. So I went to see my mom after the services, and she said, "Hey, well, what's that? You got a lump?" And I says, "Yeah." And then, of course, she insisted that I needed to go to the doctors, and they put so many needles through my throat, and they were so long, and my mom just was there watching the whole thing. And when they were done with me, it looks like somebody had just literally squeezed my throat, and it was just black and blue and green. They were saying that I had, it was a little bit callous throat cancer, and I just didn't accept that. I felt that I was going through a period in my life that I was going through a transition, and I just took some time off, and I drank a lot of I prayed upon this, and I drank some coconut milk, went out to the ocean, did a lot of, swimming in the salt, and taking a lot of sun in, and after 2 weeks, it disappeared. And I do believe in medicine, but I also believe in God in me, and that God is going to heal me. So then 10 years later, or maybe a little bit more, like when I was 45 or something like that, my husband noticed that I had some lumps in my breast. Well, he was badgering me that I had to go and go see a doctor. So I did. And of course, there was that diagnosis, and I just did not want to go back. I have my x-rays that they did, and it was just horrible. One side was worse than the other, and I had this tumor about the size of a small lemon on my left breast. Anyway, and my dad and my mother and my grandmother, who was still alive then, they did a lot of praying, and I did a lot of praying, and I just, did a lot of soul searching, and I felt that I needed to make some adjustments in my lifestyle and in my way of thinking, and just in general, and in my diet too. Well, 4 years later, almost maybe 5, I think it was about 5 years later, they were gone, and they're still gone. So I do believe in medicine, because then I actually ended up getting, shortly after, some really weird autoimmune disease between my from below my knees, and it's like I had these little, like if I got, I don't know, like they look like a bunch of little pimples, and each one of them had like temperature, and they were hot, and I couldn't walk, and it was so painful. Then I found out that, 8 in 100 people get that. It's an autoimmune, and most likely they die, and they don't know what the cause of it is. But I did go see a acupuncturist, and they prescribed natural herbs and things like that. And after several, I think it was 3 sessions of acupuncture, and I think it was astragalus. It builds up the immune system. It disappeared, and it's never come back. So I do believe in medicine, but I also believe God in me is my healer. And as I see myself perfect as this beautiful universe is, the beauty of everything, and that it does have cycles, I see that it's very powerful. The mind is very powerful. I've seen my mind work for me. So I want to share that with you. And I didn't mean for it to go this long, but if you want to keep joining me on this journey, let's go on to chapter 5.